Welcome to the Grassroots podcast. I'm your host, Toree, and today's special guest is Tasha Guidry, who is a passionate community advocate, a criminologist, and a life coach who brings a powerful perspective on what it truly takes to help communities rebuild and thrive. Tasha wears many hats, and we do get into that in the rest of the conversation. We talk a lot about Lake Charles, where Tasha lives, and a region where I'm from myself, and we talk about the recovery process that Lake Charles has been going through after the impact of hurricanes like Laura and Delta. Tasha shares her firsthand experience in navigating this long road to recovery. She addresses the complexities of accessing resources and also the role of civic engagement and local journalism. We talk about the power of listening, the importance of education, and why advocacy must be empathetic and consistent. Whether you're an aspiring change maker, organizer, or you're simply interested in how real transformation happens on the ground, this episode offers valuable insight into the collaboration and care that community work demands. Thank you for being here, Tasha. So I want to start by asking you about organizing in Lake Charles and working in Lake Charles. What led you to doing that, and what has your experience been like dealing with, a place like Lake Charles, which has a lot going on a lot of the time?
Working in Lake Charles and doing community service work or being a community advocate, it's pretty easy to serve. And of course, I come from a background where I had two parents that were community advocates. They were always at work or they were out doing something to give back to the place that we lived. Um, Here, the need is great. So that makes it very easy to serve, this particular population. We've had issues with everything from affordable housing. And then, of course, we went from in 2020, while the rest of the world was mostly dealing with the pandemic that we didn't know was coming and it was unexpected. In the midst of the pandemic, we also had the storms, Laura and Delta. So here it is, 2025. The local elected officials always want to tell you that we are finished with recovery. We're not. We're still in recovery mode here. So the work is still going on, so we always will have a need. But what we looked like prior to the storm, we still look like after the storm. We still have a lot of blue tarps and roofs and stuff that need to be repaired. We still have a lot of people that are displaced that haven't come back here yet. But the issues that we had before, particularly in the marginalized community, we still have the needs that those were not met prior to the storm, like expanded bus routes and service times. Here, the transportation stops at 5:45. So, and it doesn't go everywhere. So if you work at the local plant industry or the casinos and you don't have transportation, then you have to either pay for a ride through Lyft, because we don't have Uber here, so we only have Lyft. So it's intermittent transportation, critical care, emergency care after hours in North Lake Charles. So we still need to work on those issues, and a grocery store in walking distance. So those were the issues we had prior to the storm that linger even now as we build and recover. 5 years later, these are still some of the issues that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. 5:45 ending bus routes is so shocking. I'm like, how where are people going to go after that? That's so early. I'm shocked to hear that, but that's crazy.
Right.
Yeah. Um, okay, yeah. So you've been in Lake Charles for a while. You've been working in community for a long time. You do a lot of things, and you just mentioned a ton of things. So when someone asks you what you do, what do you say?
Well, I say that I'm a master's level criminologist, so I'll start with that. But I run an organization, I run a business that is people centric.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that I try to meet the needs of the people. In my private practice, I mostly work in the criminal justice system, providing mitigation services. So I help people get prepared for court and trial. Mm-hmm. So I may have clients that come from the local judiciary or a private attorney or a law firm that I'm working with. But then in the organizing work, I kind of do it all. So that's why I say it's a people-centric build business that kind of toggles over into my community advocacy work. So everything I do is people-centric.
And how do you navigate, because I love that, the people-centric sort of view, how do you navigate learning what people in community need? How do you be people centric in your work?
Well, the first thing we have to remember, anytime that you're an organizer, you know, our needs are going to be different from other people's needs. And anything that we do, we have to have active listening and active observing. And we don't do a good job of that sometimes because we want to be saviors. We want to save the world. But the only way you can successfully advocate for anybody is by first talking to them and finding out what their needs are. We can't look at the surface level. We go out in Community Partners, which is one of my organizations. We do help the homeless. We started that after Laura and Delta in 2020. Well, every time that we go out, it looks different. I didn't realize that our homeless population was as large as it is here, but then we have other needs that we were not aware of as well. And you have your teens that may be in foster care or in state care. 18, most of them end up homeless because they've aged out of the system. So now we have that demographic as well as the traditional unhoused. And then we have seniors that can't afford, to get basic necessities like a roll of toilet paper or toothpaste and toothbrushes because where they live, they're on a fixed income. So we try to meet all of those needs because they all go to the same place to get a hot meal every day. So, but talking to them is how we meet those needs. So when we first started, we go and we were just doing hygiene kits and everything. And that has since expanded to a free haircut because one of our partners is a barber. So he donates his time to do a free haircut. We've added a supplemental meal. It may be a couple of sandwiches with chips and fresh fruit or whatever, because we understand that most of our people are only going to eat one time a day. So we started providing a supplemental meal as well. And that may be either be a hot meal or a sandwich setup kit. And then we've even gotten into senior products like pill dividers, blankets. We even had a lady that hadn't changed her colostomy bag in months because she couldn't afford to. So one of our partners actually is a nurse, so we were able to get supplies for that. So the only way we would know these things is if we actually talk to the people. You know what I'm saying? We can't just look at them and assume what their needs are. The only way we can do that is by employing active listening and active observing skills. So that's what you have to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. It reminds me, there's a few things I want to mention on this because I love that you're so community focused. It's people centric, but also you need community too. Like you said, you people that, are barbers or you people that, are nurses, and you need all of these
Right.
to be able to come together and actually provide these resources. That's so important. And I also, listening is such a huge thing that people don't do enough, like you said. And we have a lot of, and I feel like this happens a lot in Louisiana, and I guess anywhere where there's a lot of, a lot of Black and Brown communities. You have a lot of like
Mm-hmm.
white saviors coming into these environments and trying to do
Yes.
something. And it reminds me of a previous conversation we had about Brad Pitt going to New Orleans and doing all these different things. So it's so true. You have to listen.
And with Brad Pitt, his heart was in the right place,
Yeah,
but
sure.
I don't need you to come in and tell me how to clean my house because it's my house.
Hmm.
I need you to come in and ask me
Hmm.
what I need to clean that house. You know
Right.
what I'm saying?
Right.
That's how you be great. That's how you do your job better.
Hmm.
That's how you become a good organizer.
Yep.
So often a lot of the nonprofits, because I do nonprofit consulting, we want to assume or tell people what they need to do.
Hmm.
No, we need to ask them what they want to do and then help them get there. And
Yeah.
then once we get them to a certain point, how do we help them sustain? It,
Right.
it has to be sustainable. So we can't just give you a prom gown. We have to give you something else too, or we can't give you a school uniform and school supplies. Let us implement a financial literacy class where we teach you how to budget so that next year we're not serving the same people because we've given you the tools in order to be better. When
Hmm.
we go out and we serve the homeless and the elderly, because we do it at the same time, we have a resource book that tells them where they can go to get an ID or a license. We have to do things to make their lives better.
Hmm. Yeah, the sustainability. Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that. It is so huge and something people forget. You help people and then you're like, okay, great, you're on your way. But it's hard to maintain that. I mean, any of us struggle with maintaining a lot of things that we need in our lives. So you can only imagine if someone is in really dire circumstances and they get some help, it can be sometimes really hard to sustain that. So I'm glad you touched on that. I want to,
Right. We have to teach them how to fish.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So I want to take a step back and hear more about Cycles Life Solutions. It's you started in 2014. So can you give us an insight on what that is, why you started it, what kind of led you to doing that?
It was actually two things that led me to start Cycles. Number one, I love people. Ever since I've started working, my adult jobs has always been working in the people industry. But in 2014, I had just finished my master's a couple of years prior to that. And I was working in the local judicial system here, and the judges had capped my salary. They were like, we can't keep affording to pay you for all of this education
Mhm.
that you're getting. And so was that. I had gone through a divorce, and when you're a part of a a relationship, anything that you have to deal with other people in decision making, you tend to live for your family and what your family's needs are at that time. So 2014, I pretty much decided. I said, hey, I got my master's a couple of years ago. I'm not going to get any more money. But I wanted to do something for me, something that I could be more creative. I designed the program for the judges, but I was locked into I could only do so much. With my clients. But I said if I go out and I start my own project in my own company, I can serve more and I can offer more. So that's how Cycles came to be. I thought foolishly that I was only going to work with people from the criminal justice system. That didn't happen because at the same time that I started Cycles in 2014, I had to open up my business and I knew nothing about that. And then one of my good friends was starting his law firm, so I helped him with stuff. So I was like, you know what, I'm pretty good at this. So this needs to be one of my services. So it went from life coaching to actually a solutions business. So I said, you know what? Hey, if you need my help or you have a question, call me. Let's sit down and talk about it because I may be able to provide those services for you. So that's how it became Cycles Life Solutions. So I work with individuals, people, and organizations, and helping them do what they do better.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. So you mentioned your justice work, your criminal justice work, and then also the life coaching, which is just a general term I guess I'll use for all of the other stuff you do, even though it's life coaching, organizing, all the things. But what is the intersection with your justice work and then what your, I guess, everything else? Like, where is the intersection with that, particularly in the life coaching and kind of the sustainability thing you touched on? What, I guess, yeah, what is the intersection between those two things?
And you know what? It's funny because I'm a criminologist. So criminologists, we work on modifying behaviors, right? Well, guess what? Life coaches do the same thing. We
Mm.
both of them look at why did you do the things that you did, how we can stop you from doing those things again, and going forward, what can you do better? So it's the same concept. It's just that with life coaching, I'm able to do a lot more and be a lot more creative
Mm.
in my work. For instance, having worked in the criminal justice system for over 25 years, you and I may be identical. We may be the same age. We may come from the same socioeconomic background, but how we arrived at the deviant behavior that we've committed or the crime that we've committed is going to be totally different. You may have had something traumatic happen to you, and I may just have a means of survival. You see what I'm saying? So there's always going to be a difference as to how we winded up where we were.
Mhm.
So we have to start by treating the individual and not everybody the same. So with life coaching, what I do an individual service plan. So everybody has a separate ISP. While some of the components may be similar, they're going to be tailored to Toree and what Toree's needs are. Toree may have come from an abusive relationship, so we may need to work on that. Toree may need life skills because you don't know that swiping your card, you still have to track money. So now you have charges where you actually, writing hot checks. So you see what I'm saying? So Toree's needs may be different from Tasha's needs.
Right.
So all you're doing when you're coaching or my private practice working with people from the judiciary, it's very similar tenets, but they're a little bit different because I can be more creative on the coaching side. For my Black and Brown clients, I started a couple of years ago. I created a component called Understanding and Navigating the Criminal Justice System. So that was my coaching, the coach in me saying, wait a minute, we have to revisit this because I have people coming in that have never been in trouble before, that don't understand how to navigate the criminal system. But I also have habitual offenders that have been in trouble forever that also don't know how the system works. And it mostly impacts us. We're the ones that's charged as habitual offenders, more or less so than our white counterparts. So with understanding and navigating the criminal justice system, the criminologist said in me, if we understand the historical context of how the criminal justice system was designed, we may want to keep out of it. Mm-hmm. So what that looks like me making the watch for 14th, which was a great documentary by Will Smith on Netflix that tells you about the 14th Amendment and how it impacts the criminal justice system. That also looks like a series of other videos coupled with projects and not just projects, but comprehensive exams that my people had to pass. By the time they finished with that, they had a clear understanding as to how the system was designed, and it was not designed for them to win. So this is when your criminologist side combined with your coaching side makes effective programs.
Yeah, definitely. That all makes so much sense. And the education piece that you talked about at the end too that makes so much sense. And I wonder, I know you do a lot of work, not just in the justice system with that kind of education, but in other government things as well, like going to city council meetings and all the things. So how do you navigate? I know you kind of touched on it already, but how do you navigate educating people on even just other government things? Like even if you're working with FEMA and it's after a hurricane and you're maybe not working with FEMA, but educating people on how FEMA kind of works after a hurricane or how they're supposed to work, right? How do you go about navigating that, helping people understand, okay, well, this is how the system can help you, or this is how it works, or this is how it doesn't help you and how, it should, right?
Right. And, working in housing and those types of issues, that kind of happened by happenstance. It was an accident. Most of what I do, I stumble into. It's never planned, trust me. My plate is very full, so I'm never purposefully looking for work to do. But I was a client of the Restore program. But during this time, I also was working with Southerly Magazine and Lindsay Gilpin. Well, after the storm, she reached out, and it was a simple request. For some reason now, if you Google my name for years, which I didn't know, so I recommend everybody Google themselves, it'll pull up things that you've worked on. So when it came up to Southwest Louisiana politics or advocacy, it seems like my name pops up. So she took a shot in the dark and she said, hey, I see that you're involved in local politics. And can we meet you? And this was after Laura and Delta. Can you walk us through what's happening with so many displaced people? So from that relationship and that one interview and tour that I provided, we started working together. So with documenters.org, they reached out to Lindsay after Laura and Delta, and they said, hey, Southwest Louisiana is getting ready to get an influx of federal dollars for recovery and repairs. Do you have anybody there that we can start a pilot project for a small newsroom? So before that, it was like workshops or, I use social media a lot to get information out. But because of documenters, trying to start a small newsroom here in Southwest Louisiana and me being a part of that project, which now I now own the Journal, we were able to go to the meetings. So it started with us going to the meetings and recording and documenting what was going on, right? And we also were tracking the budgets and the money that was coming in. So like the school board may have gotten $1.5 billion, but it was supposed to be for 5 schools specifically. Well, what happened to the other schools? So these were the things that we were doing. But then also by us attending these meetings regularly, we started seeing a lot of houses on the docket to come down. Well, we put these houses on the map and we discovered that most of these houses were in the Black and brown communities, you know? And so then Restore comes in and they get the project off the ground and here's help, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we thought. Well, then we started seeing a lot of people walking away from their houses because not just Restore, but a lot of municipalities, which a lot of people don't understand, they also have resources and grants that people can get their homes fixed. Like here in Lake Charles, we have a grant called the Home Grant, and it's for repairs. I think you can get up to $60,000.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what bars people from being able to get funding with these programs, regardless of what they are, is a clear deed.
Mm-hmm.
So that looks like mom and dad died and there's heirs, but there's no clear, no clear line because they've never filed a succession. So there's no clear ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if I need Restore or I need FEMA, and these are the things that they're going to ask you, are you the primary owner of the house? Well, guess what? Most of the people in Black and brown communities, we can't afford to hire, but they
Mm-hmm.
also don't know what these processes are. So we can't afford to hire an attorney. We don't know what the process is. So what we started doing was I started writing articles about how to navigate Restore.
Mm-hmm.
One of my reporters was actually an attorney Brent Hawkins. He wrote a beautiful piece about how the demolition process worked, and we published these things
Mm-hmm.
and we got the information out, so that way people had a tool that they can now go back and look at and say, okay, so this is what I need to do X, Y, and Z in order to get the help that I need. I wish it was more of them out there like me that can explain these processes, because a lot of people don't understand, number one, how our local government works or how state government works. And at the local level, they also don't know what resources are out there for them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, trying to get the information out. You use any means necessary. I just was fortunate enough to have the journal as one of my tools that I could help get the news out.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely is frustrating because like you said, it's people aren't aware of the resources that are out there, but then the resources sometimes don't, especially if they come from like a government entity, they don't always
Right.
express that they are out there. Like they're not always really sharing that that's a resource that even is available. So I can see how that can be really frustrating. And like you said, yeah, we wish everyone could be like you and sharing all this information, but that we know the world we live in and that's just not the case, otherwise we'd be living in a
Right.
different world. But yeah, that is, I can see how that's frustrating.
And Tori, even
Mhm.
in sharing, we can share, but I've still had to go back and I'll have people reach out and call and say, hey, I'm really not understanding this. This is
Mhm.
very complex. So
Yeah.
is there a way that we can meet? And, I don't get paid for that, but I'll do it because it's a lot of
Right.
times it's older people that really don't understand. And what I find myself doing is sitting there and doing the paperwork for them
Hmm.
or walking them through the process, initially doing the work for them to make sure that they get it done. As a government entity, I think that we should do more and we should do better. We need to understand, first of all, that we will have a large part of our constituents that don't know how to do this stuff. So, can we create a program or a department that, in the times of disaster recovery, we can have 5 people from Lake Charles
Yep.
that can set up times like a triage center for paperwork that'll help them parse through what they actually need.
Hmm. Would you say that's like the most difficult part of that type of almost like translation work, is keeping people from, or keeping people educated on it and then also keeping them from getting so overwhelmed to where they just kind of give up?
Absolutely. That
Hmm.
is the biggest part. I can't tell you going to meetings how many people had just given up because they were so exhausted and so tired. And then, unfortunately, sometimes you have elected officials that don't understand the process because they didn't study it before it happened. So they can't help them. So if you have a bunch of people that, need help and services and they have nowhere to go, I'd probably walk away from my house. So then you have houses eventually that are vacated that now are in a state of, non-repair, and they wind up on the demolition block. And then guess what? We have homeless people.
Hmm.
So there's that.
Yeah. I kind of want to sit with the talking about Lake Charles and recovery because like you said, we absolutely that area is still in recovery and it just is not spoken about in that way. So how would you, if you were talking to someone and they like didn't understand that Lake Charles is still in recovery, or they just, maybe they don't grow up around hurricanes or whatever, how do you explain to people what Lake Charles looks like and what that area, I know you said what the needs are, but how do you explain to people that just don't understand that this is still an area where it's been 5 years, but there still is a lot to be done.
Oh, and it's funny that you said that because since 2020, I've done a lot of media, interviews and stuff, and it always starts the same way. They saw a blurb somewhere, and then they become intrigued, and then they're like, "How can I find this person?" And a lot of times, my referrals will come from other people that I've done interviews for, and they're all across the nation, and they'll call and they just can't believe that we're still in the place that we are. So then after I tell them, because if you talk to an elected official, they'll say a couple of things. One of the things is, and it's a myth, is that we're one big city. We're not. We're three separate cities, as far as I'm concerned. You have South Lake Charles, which is the more affluent area. Then you have Central Lake Charles, which is where I am, that is kind of mixed.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have North Lake Charles, where we had the predominant renters, and it was renters and elderly Black people that lived in the area and stayed. And most of the renters left after the storm because a lot of the houses and stuff were destroyed. And then you had landlords and homeowners that couldn't afford to repair. So I always tell them, about the loss that we have, the businesses that closed that never came back, the three different areas of North Lake Charles that prior to the storm and now more so after the storm are pretty much at a starved out state. Mm-hmm. And they never can believe it. And I'll say, hey, I'm sitting in my window right now, and I'm looking across at a blue roof. That's a real thing. And it's 2025. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? So I'm still looking at a house on my block that still has a blue roof. Mm-hmm. And it's surreal. And after I talk to them normally, they always want to come in. So I say, if you come in, you're going to get a tour. Mm-hmm. I'm going to show you what real Lake Charles looks like. Mm-hmm. And that tour looks like bringing them to North Lake Charles. It looks like bringing them to Central, and then showing them South that looks like it doesn't even belong as a part of Lake Charles. Mm-hmm. It's a city that probably a couple of weeks after the storm looked like nothing had ever happened and nothing had ever come. So then after that, they always want to talk to residents and to see where they are, why they haven't rebuilt. And even now in April of 2025, it's still easy to find people that still have stories, so it just looks like getting people here to understand. My daughter was working for a credit card company during Laura and Delta. And it was so funny because the main office is in Philadelphia. So after the storm, like a week later, they were like, hey, Breon, you actually have corporate clients that are trying to reach you, because she handled corporate accounts. Mm-hmm. And she was like, we still don't have electricity. And they were like, what? So they thought Lake Charles was a third world country. So they said, well, we know that the hurricanes came, but you don't have electricity yet? And she was like, no, we don't have electricity. We have to go to the one store that's open, even for gas for the generator. And me and my mom go cool off in the vehicle once an hour, just so we don't we don't die from heat exhaustion. So they was like, oh my God. Yeah. So they ended up sending for her to go to Philly to work. And they were like, tell your mom to come too, and we'll put you up in a hotel and stuff for the month until y'all get some, get utilities and stuff going again. She wanted to go, and I had work to do here. So of course I stayed. Mm-hmm. But it was just surreal. When you don't have to go through these experiences, you really don't know what it looks like. Mm-hmm. And I think everybody needs to be aware. Yes, it's a choice. We chose to live in the South, mm-hmm. along the Gulf Coast, mm-hmm. but ignorance is not necessarily bliss. Yeah. So we have to be empathetic to our neighbors. Mm-hmm. And the only way you can be empathetic is to know what we're experiencing. Yeah. So that needs to come from us telling these stories and people reading these stories, but even coming afterwards to see what the aftermath looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It is. I was just in DeQuincy the other day, for viewers that don't know, near Lake Charles, small town near Lake Charles, where I'm from. And yeah, there's blue tarp still all over where my grandma's neighborhood is. It definitely is surreal. Definitely is surreal. Um, so what are some of the practical changes that Lake Charles, I guess the city, but just in your opinion, what are some changes that could be made to speed up this recovery, especially in the future? Hurricanes are going to happen. I'm sure they're going to continue happening. How
Oh,
can
Lord,
we
yes.
not, yeah, exactly, knock on wood. How can we not, how can we avoid this happening again? How can we be faster for the community?
As far as recovery is concerned, the first thing we have to do is educate our citizens.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned DeQuincy still having blue tarps and blue roofs. I guarantee you the problem with that is the problem that we have here.
Mm-hmm.
No clear deeds and titles to those homes. That's why they're sitting there. You see what I'm
Yep.
saying?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I did outside of educating people by using the Southwest Louisiana Journal was we decided, well, I decided that I was going to try to do something to help. I'm always trying to do something to help. So I created an estate planning class to teach people why it was necessary to do wills and successions. Coupled by a couple months after that, I teamed up with a couple of friends that are attorneys, and they volunteered their time for a day to do free wills and successions. We're not good at planning because we think we're going to live forever, particularly in the Black and brown community. It took me forever to get my parents to do their work. So
Mm-hmm.
you can imagine people with no means. People
Yeah.
with no means don't have the money, to pay, even on a sliding scale, an attorney to do the work. So
Mm-hmm.
we actually provided that time for them. It's something that I think needs to be annual,
Mm-hmm.
um, but it also has to be funded. In order to do these things have to be funded. Everything that I do is funded by me.
Mm-hmm.
It's my way of giving back to the community for Cycles being a part of the community for over 11 years now. But measures like this, they need to be funded because it's very costly. You always have to rent the space. You have to provide, sustenance and food and stuff for the volunteers, and sometimes you get an influx of people. I think the first time we did the wills, we did
Mm-hmm.
40
Mm-hmm.
free wills, and the second time we did 49.
Mm-hmm.
I did decide that if I do it again, this time people are going to have to contribute a little something to it, even if it's $25, per person. Because let's be clear, you're not going to go to anywhere and anywhere and get one done, not even an attorney or a law center where you're going to be able to get one for free.
Yeah.
You're going to have to contribute something. Um, but it's educating people that this is why you can't get FEMA help. This is why you can't get access restore. This is
Mm-hmm.
why you can't get help from your local municipalities when they have these free home programs. And then mandating, we're not going to give you help. Sometimes we have to do that. We're not going to give you help. We're not going to even discuss it or bring you to the table until you can produce these documents.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be twofold. You'll be able to get the help and the assistance that you need should another storm come.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, not only that, we're preparing you in your demise.
Mm-hmm.
Now, your son or your daughter or your granddaughter, should you pass, they don't have to go through this when it comes to accessing the help that they need to keep your home going.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That reminds me of, I guess, just the educational piece of it. It makes me think more about the SWLA journal. And I'm wondering, with that, you mentioned it earlier, but how have you seen that encourage civic engagement and getting community members more involved into going to some of these local government meetings and wanting to pursue this education on their own? Have you seen that have an effect there?
The journals, when it started, we were not very welcome. Um, but during the time, and it's funny because just like doctors and attorneys are very territorial and protective over what they do,
Mhm.
journalists are also. Now,
Mm,
journalism was my first love. When I first started college, I actually was a mass comm major with the goal to go in and write for the Washington Post. Well, that never happened. So, but I love to write. And I love stories. So it's interesting when we started the journal. we had a lot of blowback from like the local media here. They were like, oh, y'all are not real journalists type of thing. But then they became envious because we're able to write as a small newsroom. We're able to cover the stories and do the things and say what we need to say that they can't. Now, we were formally trained by documenters.org. You know, they bought in the Wall Street Journal to teach us how to read budgets. We worked with other entities and other institutions and schools of journalism in order to prepare the reporters, and we report a certain way. But as far as the public and the community, it made them more mindful of what was going on. And then it became a thing that because we post every time the list of properties that are on the list to come down in demolition, then it became, oh my God, the government is taking everybody's houses. So then, as a journalist or a media tool, we found that it was part of our job to explain what this process looks like. Nobody's taking your home right away. Mm-hmm. They're contacting you and they're reaching out over and over again, trying to get you the help or find out what are you going to do with this property. Yeah. So it's not instantaneous. So yeah, we've had a lot of community participation or at least awareness from it. Mm-hmm. It also forced local media, what they call the real media, to start attending those meetings again, mm-hmm. because they used to cover them all the time. So we were relying on them for information. But somewhere through the years, they stopped going. Right. So then once they heard that we were there, they started showing up again. Mm-hmm. And it also forced the local city council here. They used to not record their meetings. So once we were going out, and because we didn't just report on paper, we also recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel. Mm-hmm. So if you missed the meeting, you were able to go to Southwest Louisiana Journal's YouTube channel and see the meeting. Mm-hmm. So then they decided, because we were recording, well, we're going to record now. Mm-hmm. So the journal, it's a wonderful project, but it made people do their work and do their due diligence. And it definitely helped, educate and make the public more aware.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool. It seems like it's definitely brings some accountability on all ends, whether it's accountability to the city council or to people making themselves aware, or at least reading the journal and then being aware through your work. It seems like it's adding to that accountability, which is pretty cool. I want to ask you about the Displaced project. I saw this email, I guess the other day, and it sounds really interesting. So I want to hear more and just give you the opportunity to share a little bit more about that, because it sounds like a really cool project.
Yeah, Displaced was a project that essentially came from the journal, mm-hmm. and my relationship that has grown since 2020 with media outlets and institutions. And with Southerly Magazine having been an environmental justice magazine, they always reach out to Lindsay, even though she's sunsetted. So when Displaced came about, it's Brachler and Fisher. They're out of New York, but they actually live in Sweden. They get contracted by government entities such as the UN to travel the globe and do different projects about, the needs of the world, so to speak. So they came up with the Displaced concept, and they said, hey, we need to make sure that, and it goes into the Paris Climate Agreement and COPE and all of these wonderful institutions that try to combat climate change that we see the effects of it every year. So that's what these projects are about. So they reached out to them and they said, we need to find out what our immediate needs are, because we know the world is changing and it's changing rapidly. Mm-hmm. So we need to find out about the people that get displaced from these storms and these natural disasters. So that way we can come together with a plan as a global community and figure out how we can deal with these things. So they reached out to Lindsay, and Lindsay said, hey, I don't have, Southerly anymore. However, I do have a friend in Lake Charles, Louisiana. They had 2 storms back to back. I think you need to talk to Tasha. Mm-hmm. So when they reached out, I wasn't quite understanding what the project was. So when they sent me the template, and of course, I'm going to research everybody because I come from that law enforcement background and community. And I said, oh my God, their work is amazing. Mm-hmm. So as a person that works in media, I always try to take myself out of the equation. I
Mm,
want them to talk to the people so that have the real, what I call real lived experiences.
mm,
My experiences were different because I'm able to advocate for themselves,
sure.
but I wanted them to hear the local stories about the people that were still suffering and
Yeah.
what those struggles look like. So when they reached out, they, asked questions because again, they couldn't believe almost 3.5 years later, people were still displaced. And I
Mhm,
was like, yeah, it's a real thing here. And so they said, okay, so we need to come to Lake Charles. They said, we're going to be in California covering wildfires. We're coming to you right afterwards. And I said, okay, we're going to start with the tour. I always start everything with the tour. I want them to see what I see daily, but through their eyes. So when they came in, they planned to stay for 5 days and working out in the community. I've met a lot of people. So now I put in a couple of phone calls, some to elected officials, some to friends of mine that are also out in the community. And I said, hey, I want a diverse group,
mhm,
for them to talk to. I need people that are displaced. I said, I want a variety of people so that they can hear their stories. So I ended up finding a retired fisherman from Lake Arthur, an elderly Black man, a lady that lost her restaurant in Cameron that had to now go to a food truck. So then you have that economic,
yeah.
background story that they could tell. And then, of course, local residents here and in Sulphur that they could talk to about their struggles. And the only component that I wasn't able to help them pull together, which I thought was an essential part of telling our story in Southwest Louisiana and across Louisiana in general, is that, again, if you don't live here, you don't have our experiences. I wasn't able to lock in a couple of my friends that were doing hurricane recovery work afterwards, helping people fight with insurance companies.
Mm,
I wasn't able to lock them in because I know that they had stories. You
yeah.
know, people think that recovery is just a certain thing, but they don't understand us dealing with the insurance companies is a real thing.
Yeah.
So I needed them to tell that part of what that looks like
Mhm.
from the other side. But they came in and they stayed 5 days, talked to a lot of people, and came together with some beautiful pictures. And now I think they're on their way to Bangladesh,
Mm,
and they have a couple more places after that because they're literally traveling the globe. So
wow.
this place will be in the at the next COPE,
Mm,
which people all across the world will see all of these stories from across the globe, whether it was wildfires, floods, whatever natural disaster these people encountered, they will hear our stories of what being displaced looks like,
wow.
um, coupled with oral histories and oral stories. So you'll not only see the pictures, but you'll actually, and you won't see just the images, but you'll hear our words
Mm,
as well. And Southwest Louisiana, now I'm proud to say, will be a part of this. And then the final resting place is that it will be on display at the United Nations.
wow, that's incredible. That is so, so cool. And to have the photos and like you said, the actual words, that's a really, really cool project and definitely needed. So that's very cool. My last question before we close is pretty simple. If just do you have any advice if someone wants to be like you, if someone wants to be like Tasha, do work in community, do all these things, what's your advice for that person who wants to just, do more for their community, put more work back into their community? What's your advice for that person?
I don't want anybody to be like Tasha. I'll start with that. Because Tasha has a tendency to get involved in a whole lot of things at one time. I tell people that my CV is ever evolving
Hmm.
because people look at it and they're like, whoa, so why do you want to work with us? Or why do you want to work for us? Because it looks like you have your hands in so much. How can you be effective at it? And that's easy. I don't do anything I don't love.
Mm,
You have to have a passion for whatever it is that you do. If not, it becomes work. And Toree, I don't want to work.
hmm,
I don't want to work a day in my life. I get to
hmm.
have fun 365 days out the year. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So if you're going to do advocacy work, first of all, you have to talk to the people. That's the only way you're going to know what the needs are. But make sure that before you get involved, that it's in a project that, number one, you're going to stick with.
Mm,
You have to stick with that project, and you have to understand that A lot of people have the passion and the drive, but then they don't stick with it. So then the community lacks that resource all over again.
Yeah.
Continuity makes sense. You
Mm-hmm.
know, people want to see that the people in the blue shirts are coming out twice a year. You
Yeah.
see what I'm saying? And they
Mm-hmm.
look for us.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're no longer there, then you have a gap in services and resources again. But if you're passionate about it, you're going to stick with it, even if you have to go out and do it by yourself. So never do anything that you don't want to do. So that way it's not work.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to really serve and serve well, you have to talk to the people, because
Yeah.
what you see on the surface sometimes is not always what the story is.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ways that I had to educate my colleagues in community partners was, you know, I believe in dignity. Just because you don't have doesn't mean that, you know, you want people to have a certain amount of dignity about themselves.
Yep.
So we're not just giving you a toothbrush with no cover.
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving you, because most of our people are unhoused and homeless. So when you get a kit from me, that kit is going to look like a waterproof backpack,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't want the only thing that you own to be saturated by the elements. Your soap is going to be in a plastic soap dish. Your toothbrush is going to have a, you know what I'm saying? A
Yep.
toothbrush cover.
Mm-hmm.
These things mean a lot.
Yeah.
You know, they might not mean much to us, but it means a lot to somebody that has nowhere else to go. And this is the only thing that I have. We also try to buy not travel size, like a lot of people that do hygiene kits. They do the best that they can, but we have to remember. And I told my partners, because one of them said, "Well, why do we have to buy full size?" I said, "Because they don't have pantries that they can go to and pull out the closet when they need a new tube of toothpaste."
Right.
So even though, it may cost us a little more, we always buy full size everything,
Mm-hmm.
for them. So knowing what the need really is, talking to the people, and most of all, like I said, knowing loving what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you love what you do, then you don't have burnout.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's great advice. And yes, definitely so true. Listening and making sure you actually are invested and passionate and can be consistent and show up every day. Well, thank you so much for being here. I had a great time talking to you. We had a great conversation. You do so much work and you're so knowledgeable on so many things in Lake Charles, but just in general. So I really appreciate you coming on, Tasha. Is there
Well,
anything
thank you for
else?
having me.
Yeah, of course. Is there anything else you want to share or say or anything before we go?
I think we talked about everything. Wow, we talked about so much.
We
The
really
only
did.
thing that I would recommend whoever is listening, is if you have a passion to serve, find a local organization that needs your help, and get out there and do the best that you can.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly with this presidential administration, a lot of organizations that serve are struggling.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care if it's $5 or if it's $1. That dollar might buy a bar of soap. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Um, we're all under the gun and we're all watching. But imagine those, that are out there like me, that are trying to do good work now with even more limited resources.
Mm-hmm.
So give what you can, even if it's just volunteering. That's one less stressor that we have in order to get out there and serve the people. And we're going to have to serve a lot of people, because we
Mm-hmm.
have people that are losing jobs that they thought that they were going to have. So now it's not just the unhoused and the homeless, but it's also, people that were employed that now have to go to the food banks, volunteer at the food banks. If you pick up, a couple of cans of food, get a couple of extra cans and go drop them off. Every little bit matters and every little bit helps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely make those first steps to get involved. And I'm sure parts of this conversation can definitely be inspiring because, like I said, you do so many things. Maybe someone can think, oh, I have a passion for this, or oh, I'm going to do this. So definitely, definitely, I appreciate that. Thank you again for coming on. This has been great.
And I've had a ball. So thank you for having me.